Ladies and gentlemen, if you follow chess in the year 2021, then you're obviously familiar with one Norwegian named Magnus Carlsen. He is the best player in the world currently, and he is arguably the greatest chess player who's ever lived, at least up until this very moment. But in this video, we're going to talk about a bad day that he had in the year 2013, because all great players do have bad days, and conveniently, this is being recorded in the middle of the World Chess Championship, where Magnus is not really having too many bad days, but it's 2013, and it's the Candidates Tournament, and it's the final round. The Candidates Tournament is an 8-player double round robin, so there are 14 rounds, and it determines who challenges the world champion next. In this video, I'm going to take you through 2 games at the same time. We're only going to jump around a little bit. Timestamps are on the video player, just in case you get confused. But this is it. Magnus has 8.5 points out of 13, and he needs to win to guarantee that he is going to qualify to play against Viswanathan Anand for the World Chess Championship match. However, on the other side, we got Vladimir Kramnik playing with the black pieces, who also has 8.5 points out of 13. So kind of an interesting situation. In the candidates, tie breaks are determined by a head-to-head score first if 2 people tie for first place. Does that make sense? But the problem is, Magnus and Kramnik drew both their games against each other, so you can't use that. But Magnus has more wins. So Kramnik is going to go all out with the black pieces. Magnus is going to try to win and guarantee that he qualifies. So Magnus begins the game with e4 against Peter Svidler of Russia, who is not in contention to win the candidates, but he is in contention to potentially spoil everything. And we have a Spanish. As is very traditional in top-level chess, if you've been following the World Chess Championship currently, we've seen this opening a lot. This is the Spanish. A6, this is a traditional Morphy's defense. You invite the bishop to either commit to taking the knight, which is not any sort of try for an advantage at the highest level, although the exchange Ruy Lopez is not terrible. But bishop A4, and a little bit later, white is going to get hit with B5, and this bishop is going to get kicked back. Right now, people are playing rook to E1, and after B5, bishop B3, they are figuring out what to do with these 2 pawns. But in this game, Magnus chose the actually very preemptive D3, and D3 is going to lead to some maneuvering games. You are very much kind of like putting C3, D4, the traditional Ruy plan, to the side. Maybe you're still going to achieve it, but it's going to be significantly later in the game. Black plays B5, which forces the bishop back to B3. We have the move D6, A3, and knight C3. This Spanish A3, D3, knight C3 is really interesting. It's very unique. The point is that white has sidestepped a lot of the traditional knight A5 ideas by black, and now this bishop will just have a comfortable home on A2. This knight will either reroute to G3 or potentially try to fight directly for the center square. Sometimes white will even go to G5 and take this knight before planting something here. So very interesting stuff. Bishop B7, Svidler develops his bishop on the queen side. Magnus plays bishop D2. Because he doesn't want to go to E3, there might be some knight G4. He also doesn't want to go to G5 just yet. He could go to G5, but he chooses to go to D2. So we have queen D7, and now Magnus plays A4. So it's like, okay, he played A3, but now he is trying to instigate a little bit with Svidler over there on the queen side, right? So he's just finding his moment, right? At some point, he's gonna have to create something in this game. Knight D8, interesting move by Peter. So brings the bishop to direct play for the middle, defends the pawn with his queen and his pawn. And if we get AB, AB, the bishop is gonna still be defending this rook, and the knight can potentially transfer back this way in the future. So interesting idea. We have AB5, AB5. Magnus trades everything and plays knight to E2. Not something we did not expect. He is probably going to put his knight on G3 and probably fight for the F5 square. The F5 square is a juicy square in many Spanishes. Also F4, so knight H5, knight F4. Maybe he will also play on the queen side with either a queen or a rook. I mean, we are going to find out. But the game is very much balanced. Very much balanced. Nobody's done anything crazy just yet. Peter thinks for a while here and plays the move knight e6. He has a lot of options, but in reality, it's just a question of will he achieve the center break d5. He defends it with his queen, his knight, and his bishop, so naturally that's kind of like the next step in the position. He can't play d5 because the corresponding pawn is just hanging. So he would just lose the pawn. So he needs to find a way to make that happen. Magnus continues his knight journey to g3. And, the real question is, like, Magnus could play this very solidly. He could play this for a draw. But then he is relying on Kramnik on the next board to you know, to not lose, essentially, right? Like, if Magnus ends the tournament with 9, then it's up to Kramnik. I mean, if Kramnik wins with the black pieces, he has 9.5 points, so he's going to leapfrog Magnus, and then he's going to win the entire tournament. They have the same score, and they're just watching each other play side by side. So it's kind of interesting, right? So c5. So Svidler takes some space. Maybe he's going to go queen c7 so that he defends this and is able to achieve the move d5. And queen c7 also prepares the move c4, potentially, because these are all kind of different ideas here. All right, we have knight to f5. That's a very nice looking move. The thing is, now black can actually play c4, even though it looks impossible, because after dc4, this pawn just loses all its defense. So there could be a simplification there, right? So we have bishop to d8. And now, after bishop d8, Magnus plays a very interesting move, c4. This is actually an extremely unpleasant thing. It makes black's life very difficult, because naturally you want to just go here to just kind of close everything, right? But then this bishop comes to a4, and I'm not so sure this bishop is ever going to get involved in this game. This knight is very strong on f5, yeah, I mean, after c4, the position is a bit unpleasant. Plus, with this knight on f5, you are kind of always threatening sort of various degrees of infiltrating on the queen side and king side, not queen side, and breaking everything apart and just smashing. So b takes c4, bishop c4, bishop c7, and Svidler is a move away from accomplishing what he needs to accomplish in order to liberate his position. Rook e1 played by Magnus, adding a layer of defense to this pawn. But furthermore, it looks like stopping d5, because after d5, ed5, now there is this. So again, that is the crux, the problem of the black position. And I mean, it's looking quite unpleasant here for black, because if you cannot successfully achieve d5, I mean, you're just not going to be very happy. So here, Svidler goes for think and plays the move knight h5. And right at this moment, the game begins kind of getting a little bit spicy, because Peter is also going to win the battle for the corresponding square on this side of the board, f4. And if he can get to f4 and then potentially just completely smash open the position, it's not just Magnus who is trying to beat Svidler, it's also Svidler who is trying to beat Magnus. And we have g3, which prevents this, but does weaken the position a little bit, right? The light squares are a little bit weak. We have g6, kind of baiting Magnus in forward with king g7. And here, Magnus jumps in again. And he is starting to take the upper hand in the position. I mean, his knights are infiltrating. But now we're going to pause. And the timestamp's on the video player if you're mad at me, if you want to just jump back into this game a little bit further. But let's take a look at what's going on in the neighboring game. What's going on in the neighboring game? Because Vladimir Kramnik is also playing for a win. So what does he do against d4, against Vasily Ivanchuk? He plays d6. This is so shocking. You will never, ever, ever, ever see a Peer's defense. Did I say ever? You will never see this in the candidates ever again. This is probably the last time that you've seen it. I mean, it's so rare at that level, because objectively white is just better against the Peer's defense. You want to find a different way to play for a win, maybe, but Kramnik plays the Peer's defense for a victory, which is great at lower level. But while that game is happening, these two players are having their own discussions, and Ivanchuk's a smart guy. He plays what's known as the quiet system, literally. This is known as the classical, knight f3, knight c3, bishop e2, because against this, you can play like Austrian attack, you can get really aggressive. You can play the 150 attack, or I think it's 150 or 160. I don't know why it's called that. Maybe that's how many IQ points you have if you play it. You play like this, and you castle, and you go like this, like, you know, you long castle and battery with the dark squared bishop, and you go trade and create an attack. But Ivanchuk knows that Kramnik needs to play this for a win against him, right? So Ivanchuk just plays like ultra solid, and Kramnik, in the meanwhile, is like, all right, I need to create calculated risk in this game, so I'm going to play knight c6. Trying to be provocative, maybe get Ivanchuk to play the move d5, and I can put my knight in the middle, compromising my structure, but creating some pawn imbalances. Or go back to b8, try to lock the center, get a typical King's Indian attack going on my opponent. But Ivanchuk just plays bishop g5 and a3. I mean, he is playing just ultra solid. h3, a3, not allowing anything to come at him on the sides of the board. Maybe queen d2, maybe bishop h6. So Kramnik plays h6, kicking back the bishop, and e5. right? Now, Ivanchuk here goes even like the most, it's called like the most scumbag solid way imaginable. He takes and he goes like this. I mean, symmetrical, dead symmetry in the center because he understands that Kramnik has to go to him. But bishop c5 is where he begins exploiting Kramnik overextending a little bit. Kramnik has some weaknesses on the queen side, and he has this very weak square on the on c5. Queen side and c5 weaknesses, and here Ivanchuk plays a very nice move. b4. b4 is what you do when you are like setting up, you know, you gotta like hammer the nail, so you like set everything correctly. I think that's what you do. I mean, is that like a horrible comparison? Any carpenters in the comments? Sometimes the YouTube commenters know absolutely everything. b4 is a very nice move because it's like you lodge everything in place, and now you're gonna start hammering away at the queen side. a4, and you know you're not gonna slip, you're not gonna hit your finger. a4 is coming. b4 is a nice move, freezing everything over there on that side of the board. And Ivanchuk dominates the center. That's like the thing. The one open file, he dominates with his rook against the bishop and the queen. b4 comes, and a few moves later, we have a4 on the board as well. So Ivanchuk is calling Kramnik's bluff. He's like, yo, they're not talking to each other during the game, but he's like, yo, you played a little bit of a dubious opening, brother. And I don't know why he sounds like Khabib. He's like, brother, this is #1 bullshit opening, brother. So b4, a4, I'm going to put your queen side to the test here. And Kramnik needs to now defend because he has played this in a slightly inaccurate way. And, you know, he was looking for something. He was looking for anything. Knight versus bishop, bad pawn structure. But Ivanchuk has kept everything the same. I mean, all they did was trade their d-pawns. And the only thing that is imbalanced in the position is white's queen side attacking black's queen side. And the more space that he has over there. So, Kramnik actually, in many ways, look at this. This is actually very interesting. Plays in a very similar way to Svidler. In fact, Svidler's knights are on the exact same squares when we are going to jump back to their game. So we have this and knight to f4. And it's clear that Kramnik, despite having a worse position, he's doing his best. He is playing this for a win because Magnus over there seems to be spicing up his position. Now, how much looking at the game he did, I don't know. But he is trying to win this game to qualify for the candidates, to get a rematch with the world champion Anand. But now, it's time for part 2 and the conclusion of the Magnus Carlsen game. Remember, this is right around the same moment, move 2021, that halfway point of the game. Magnus plays knight to g5. Svidler plays knight takes, bishop takes, and now plays d5. So the center is about to explode. This is exactly what you want if you want to win. So what is Magnus going to do? Magnus plays ed5, bishop takes d5, and knight back to g4. f6 and h6 are up for grabs. Bishop f6, queen h6 would be really nice if he has some way of making this work. But suddenly Svidler plays bishop f3. By the way, you might notice that the queen can take the knight, but this can take this. And if this takes this, there is going to be this. And that's defended. So, but we have bishop f3. And bishop f3 actually really cools off white's attack. Because now you very much are threatening to take the knight. If you make a lazy retreating move like knight to e3, dynamite strikes. Dynamite strikes. Very similar attacking style. Knight comes to f4, as in the other game. And after it takes, queen h3, this knight will be taken, and white gets mated. Or queen g4, when you get rid of the knight. White is mated. Magnus Carlsen will lose this game. Certainly Magnus Carlsen will not be losing this game. I mean, let's be serious, right? Bishop f6 check. Now, if knight takes f6, like I said, queen h6, knight takes, and the game is over. So Svidler goes here, and Carlsen continues to swirl, but now the bishop retreats. And where is Magnus's attack? This bishop is hanging. Queen c5 is a thing, but then bishop blocks on d6. So what is Magnus gonna do? He gets out of the way. But here comes Peter Svidler. Now here, there is, again, this check that you can play, but after king g7, this knight is just stuck. I mean, you let your knight roam too far, it's gonna get hit by a car on the highway. So f3, but uh-oh, Peter Svidler has arrived. His sniper bishops are standing on the opposite side of the board, attacking the king. The pawns have left the king's defenses. They've wandered too far, and now it's like, bah! And the queen, meanwhile, the queen's just standing around like, what's up? This is a mate threat. Like, don't be fooled, that is mate. So Carlsen needs to react, so what does he do? He takes the knight. But now the bishop hangs. Now the knight is trapped. Carlsen takes on f7, but now bishop takes f3. So even though his pieces are near the king, they're not actually creating any threats. The knight is legit trapped. It has no way back. It has no way back. I mean, it's just stuck being defended like this. So we have queen f2. You can't take the bishop because then the rook is hanging. Magnus Carlsen is going to lose this game. Queen comes back to f2. Queen g4 check, queen g3, and Peter Svidler takes. And when the dust settles, Peter Svidler has launched a successful attack and is simply a pawn up. 2 bishops and 4 pawns versus bishop, knight, and 3. But it's much worse than that. It's not just the pawn. It's the fact that if the knight tries to retreat and h6 is played, look at this position. Peter has a 3-on-1. That is a winning pawn majority in most endgames, especially when the pieces are reduced to knights and bishops. 2 versus 0, especially when they're connected, F and G, G and H together, they're going hand in hand. If they're on opposite sides, it's not always a good thing, but it's a good thing against the piece that can't move like a knight. And this knight can't move. I mean, he's going to try to bring it back, but then the king's going to march forward. So we have knight h6, bishop down to d1. King f2, f3. The pawns are tied together now. You would think you can go bishop d5, but this knight is going to get 1, and h2 is hanging. So Magnus plays h3, knight f7, g5. The pawns are coming. g5, g4, g3. It's just over. The knight has absolutely no escape. Move 41. Look at Peter Svidler sacrificing this bishop and promoting with bishop to h2 and g1 queen. And here Magnus Carlsen resigned the game with 8.5 points out of 14. Meanwhile, the other game is still going. Kramnik is still fighting back, and we are going to finish that game now. Kramnik is fighting back from this worst position by creating an attack on the king the same way that Peter Svidler is trying to create an attack against Magnus Carlsen. At the same time that this is happening. We didn't go 20 moves in the future at the time of the game. So, in this position, after knight h f4, we have knight to d5. Ivanchuk strikes back in the center. Bishop b5, bishop b3, and bishop comes back to c6. Now, if somehow the queen could get over here, just like it did, I know it would be captured. I'm just saying somehow if that was possible, just like in the Carlsen game, then obviously Kramnik would be in pretty good shape. Ivanchuk plays rook to a5. Queen b7. Rook to d8. According to the engine, the position is back in the balance. It was about +1 for a few moves. So Kramnik's strategy is paying off. Vladimir Kramnik is on his way to potentially not losing this game. Of course, he doesn't know yet that Magnus has lost around move 25. Magnus's game is still going. So we have g3. Takes, giving up a pawn with check. King g2, knight g5. But do you know why he did this? Do you know why Ivanchuk gave up the pawn? Because the h-file is a juicy attacking square. And while one queen stares this way, what is this queen doing? That queen is locked away in the tallest room of the tallest castle, #Shrek, and has absolutely no business participating in this game. And Ivanchuk plays rook h1, looks up at Kramnik and says, well, okay, because all Russians who get interviewed say, well, okay. I don't know, it's just like a rite of passage. Kramnik plays king g8, escaping the h-file, but now we have knight takes g5, and Ivanchuk is coming in. We have knight takes g5, f3, holding everything together, and I mean, it looks like he's going to get repelled. I mean, he's going to kick out his bishop, and he's going to have a nice kind of stabilizing moment. Knight back to e6, rook d8. Let's not forget, I mean, Kramnik is up a pawn. That can't be underestimated in such positions. We have queen c8, queen b3. Ivanchuk creates a threat, h5, and the position is swirling, and now Kramnik realizes his weaknesses are going to be the end of him. Notice how Ivanchuk created an attack on this side of the board and immediately went back that way. He trimmed down the forces of the position. There was a couple of key exchanges, and despite being a pawn down, his position is so active that the long-term problems that Kramnik created for himself by overextending are going to end up being very serious. So Kramnik plays h4. Because he understands that queen d8, queen h4, knight f4 has to happen, but Ivanchuk is just too active. I mean, it almost feels like Ivanchuk has an extra piece somehow. So, pawn takes h4, queen d8. And Ivanchuk is stabilizing everything. He's broken through on the queen side. He's defending his weakness over here. Rook c7 played by Kramnik, and we have bishop takes e6. A move that you almost don't even want to play because your bishop is so nice. But you take, and now b5. Look at this. There is a possibility to play bishop b6. But then the queen comes down to d2, and that looks absolutely terrifying. So let's not do that. b5, rook b7, and now we have b6. c5, Kramnik tries to fight back. The players have made the time control. Queen b8, rook a1, and that's it. It's looking like Ivanchuk is going to get down to a8, remove the defense of the back rank. Bishop c5 hits the pawn that's trying to protect the bishop, that's trying to protect the king. I mean, everything is collapsing. Ivanchuk spent time breaking down the middle, the right side, the left side, and queens come off the board. But the problem is you can't even play rook takes b6, because after this, everything is lost. You can play rook b5, but then c4 comes, as well as bishop h6. It's just over. And on move 47, with king f1 played, threatening the walk of shame or empowerment, I suppose, to c6, Kramnik, just minutes after Magnus Carlsen resigned his game, resigns his own. And that is how the candidates of 2013 concluded. The two frontrunners with 8.5 points out of 13 lost in shocking fashion. Magnus losing twice with the white pieces in the same tournament, something completely unheard of at the time, because he was 28-72. He was the highest rated player in the world. And Kramnik going all out with a slightly offbeat and frankly not a good opening at the highest level of the game when you've got many others. I mean, Kramnik could have went for, you know, a Grunfeld, or he could have went for a Slav defense or a semi-Slav defense with d5, a triangle setup. Chooses the Peer's defense, goes all in, and Ivanchuk calls his bluff. And a day which could have been Magnus Carlsen's worst day of his entire career ended up potentially being one of the best. Perhaps maybe only second to him winning the World Championship match. Or in the future, him getting married and the birth of his first child, which at December 6, 2021 hasn't happened yet. So that is how Magnus Carlsen almost did not win the candidates and almost did not qualify to play the World Championship, and thus setting off a potential butterfly effect where maybe he is world champion in that timeline, but maybe not.